22 February 2026. The Mexican army kills the most wanted criminal on the planet in a small town in Jalisco state. The US government had a $15 million reward on his head. The Mexican government stacked on another 300 million pesos. Neither was ever claimed because nobody dared talk. When the news broke, 252 violent incidents erupted simultaneously across 20 Mexican states within hours. 25 National Guard members were killed in 6 armed confrontations in Jalisco alone. Guadalajara turned into a ghost town. Civilians received text messages directly from the cartel. "Stay in your homes. We don't care if you're innocent."
This wasn't the reaction of an organization being taken down. This was the reaction of an empire losing its leader. If you think this story has nothing to do with New Zealand, stay until the end, because it's more directly connected than you'd expect. Hit subscribe now. This is only the beginning.
To understand the CJNG, you need to understand the man who built it. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes was born on 17th of July 1966 in the rural community of Culotitlan in Aguililla, Michoacán. His family grew avocados. He dropped out of primary school, immigrated illegally to the United States, got picked up on heroin-related charges in California, and deported back to Mexico. After he returned, he became a police officer, not to enforce the law, but to learn how it worked and where the gaps were. After he returned to Mexico, he worked as a police officer in the western state of Jalisco, but soon resumed his criminal activities, building his influence in the shadowy world of narcotics and rising to become the head of one of the country's most powerful and ruthless criminal empires. His alias, El Mencho, a former cop, a deported criminal, a man who understood both sides of the system and chose to exploit them both. The CJNG emerged from the Milenio Cartel following a series of killings, arrests, and internal fractures. CJNG emerged in 2010 from the remnants of the Milenio Cartel, a former faction of the Sinaloa Cartel. Initially, CJNG operated as Sinaloa's armed wing, a tool for eliminating enemies and clearing territory for El Chapo. But El Mencho had no intention of being anyone's tool forever. In 2014, the CJNG separated from the Sinaloa Cartel. Operating independently, the CJNG initiated conflicts with major cartels across Mexico, including former allies in the Sinaloa Cartel, leading to widespread violence and fatalities in states like Jalisco, Colima, Guanajuato, Zacatecas, and Michoacán. From tool to competitor, from ally to enemy, no transition period, no warning.
This is what separates CJNG from every criminal organization that came before it. CJNG uses a franchise model, an affiliation agreement between smaller local cartels and CJNG, to facilitate expansion outside of its strongholds in Jalisco, Nayarit, and Colima. What does that actually mean? CJNG doesn't need to physically occupy every territory. Instead, it allows smaller local gangs to buy into the brand. In return, protection, reputation, drug supply, and weapons. In exchange, commission payments and loyalty. Analysis of the CJNG's relations with other groups suggests that the CJNG holds ties with at least 37 affiliated criminal groups, and unlike its rival, the Sinaloa Cartel, it maintains a hierarchical and centralized structure, preventing internal alliances between subordinated criminal organizations. This isn't a gang. This is a multinational corporation, operating on a global franchise model. In March 2025, activists discovered the remains of hundreds of CJNG recruits at a CJNG training camp in Jalisco, known as the Izaguirre Ranch. Not a cemetery, not a memorial. Evidence of people who were recruited, then disposed of when they were no longer useful. In April 2015, the CJNG killed 15 Mexican police officers during an ambush in Jalisco, one of the single deadliest attacks on security forces in modern Mexican history. That same month, CJNG shot down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade. CJNG conducts public executions and displays the bodies, often publicizing these acts on social media or leaving threatening messages. This isn't disorganized violence. This is a deliberate media strategy, engineered to create measurable fear. CJNG's assets are thought to be worth over $20 billion. Where does that come from? Methamphetamine is at the core of the CJNG's criminal empire. The cartel's strategy focused on making meth production a community-driven process, allowing smaller local groups to operate meth labs and sell the drug back to the cartel. This decentralized approach allowed the CJNG to dominate meth production, controlling over 50% of the meth labs found in Mexico between 2006 and 2018. By 2021, meth seizures at the Mexico-California border had risen by 300%, with the CJNG contributing to the majority of the supply. Fentanyl's appeal lies in its potency. A single kilogram of fentanyl, costing between $3,000 and $4,000, can be stretched into 16 to 24 kilograms of drug product, yielding upwards of $1.3 million in street value. And it doesn't stop at drugs. CJNG has diversified its activities and sources of income, relying on extortion, kidnapping, human trafficking, illegal mining, and oil theft. A fully diversified criminal conglomerate, with a broader portfolio than most companies listed on the NZX. Mencho kept an extraordinarily low profile, keeping such a low profile that all known photographs of him were decades old. While El Chapo was giving magazine interviews and sitting down with Sean Penn, Mencho didn't exist in public space. No clear photos, no footage, no interviews. His nickname in criminal circles, the Ghost. Since 2017, Oseguera Cervantes had been indicted several times in the United States for drug trafficking. The most recent indictment, in April 2022, charged Oseguera Cervantes with engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to manufacture and distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl for importation into the United States. Bounty: $15 million from the US, 300 million pesos from Mexico. For nearly a decade, nobody exchanged him for that money. Not because nobody knew where he was, but because anyone who knew was too afraid to say so. On February 22, 2026, Oseguera was captured by the Mexican army during a security operation in Tapalpa, Jalisco, and he later died from injuries sustained during the crossfire while being transported to Mexico City. The operation, aided by US intelligence, triggered widespread retaliatory violence by the CJNG, including road blockades, vehicle fires, and clashes that killed at least 25 National Guard members. 252 violent incidents, 20 states, within hours. Mencho was buried in Zapopan following an elaborate funeral ceremony on March 3rd that saw him interred in a golden casket. A golden casket, an elaborate state-like funeral in a country on fire because of his death. This is what happens when a drug lord dies.
On 18 March 2026, the Wall Street Journal reported that a US citizen named Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, known as LO3, was now the CHNG's new leader. On 6 April 2026, El País confirmed that Valencia Gonzalez, Mencho's stepson, had successfully worked his way through the power vacuum created by Mencho's death to succeed him as head of the CAN. The US State Department is now offering up to $5 million for information leading to LO3's arrest. But there's a complication. LO3 is an American citizen, born and raised in the United States. That creates specific legal and intelligence constraints that US law enforcement must navigate when tracking him. On 27 April 2026, Mexican Special Forces arrested Arias Flores Silva, who is considered a potential successor to Mencho. The Mexican Navy confirmed that the operation to arrest Silva resulted from 19 months of surveillance and involved more than 500 personnel, 6 helicopters, and intelligence and reconnaissance aircraft. CJNG is mid-transition. History tells us this is usually the most dangerous phase of all.
And here's where this story becomes directly relevant to us. The group has contacts in over 40 countries, including the Americas, as well as in Australia, China, and Southeast Asia, according to the US State Department. Australia and New Zealand sit on the same distribution line. CJNG is heavily involved in the production and trafficking of methamphetamine and fentanyl, with links to suppliers of chemical precursors in China, and controls several seaports for importing chemicals. Those precursor chemicals travel from China to Mexico, get processed into high-purity methamphetamine, then move via shipping containers across the Pacific, including into New Zealand. Operation Brewer: 200 kilograms of methamphetamine concealed inside agricultural machinery. Operation Texas: 134 kilograms of pseudoephedrine intercepted at the New Zealand border. Those numbers don't come from nowhere, they come from somewhere, and CJNG is one of the largest suppliers operating across the Pacific region. Mencho is dead, but his death won't necessarily cripple the multi-billion-dollar operation he oversaw, which remains intact following his death. Because CJNG was never built around one person, it was built around a system. And that system is still running, still shipping, still supplying organizations like the Comancheros here in New Zealand. The question isn't whether CJNG collapses after Mencho's death. The question is who fills that space, and whether the next leader comes in harder or more cautious. This story isn't just about Mexico. It's a reminder that hits close to home for all of us here in Aotearoa. Organised crime doesn't start with violence. It starts with gaps in opportunity, in belonging, in hope. A community that stays ahead of that invests in its people before the void gets filled by something far darker. Systems outlast individuals. CJNG survived Mencho because it was built into the structure, not the man. Our communities need to work the same way. Safety has to be woven into our whānau, our schools, and our neighbourhoods. Not dependent on any single person or policy. Silence enables it. Organised crime thrives where people are too afraid to speak. Here in New Zealand, we have the right and the responsibility to say something, to police, to our communities, to each other. That courage is exactly what these organisations fear most. And understanding is protection. Knowing how these networks operate makes you harder to manipulate, harder to recruit, and harder to harm. The strongest weapon against organised crime isn't a warrant. It's a community that doesn't need it. What do you reckon is the single most important thing we can do to keep our communities safe?